Welcome to the TDA Learning Podcast, where we bring you conversation with leaders who are shaping the future of learning, leadership, and business. I'm delighted to welcome our guest today, Mr. Lalit Suresh. He is a talent development and capability transformation leader, has more than 25 years of experience in especially enterprise learning. He leads global talent development, driving AI and Gen AI workforce enablement, technology, academies, and large-scale capability transformation. His work demonstrates how learning, when aligned with specially the business strategy, becomes a true competitive advantage. Also joining us as the interviewer is Mr. Ram Bende, founder and director of TDA Learning and Development. He has over 14 years of experience, especially in learning and development. Ram has partnered with many organizations across different industries to design business focused learning solutions and those transform potential into performance. Mr. Lalit, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you
Thank you.
both. Thank you, Santosh and Ram, for inviting me for this event today.
Mr. Lalit, welcome once again. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's truly a pleasure to have you here. So, you have been at the forefront of talent development and capability transformation over last 25 years. And you have witnessed the transformation of learning from traditional classroom training to the AI-enabled capability building. And I'm sure our audience is looking forward to learn from your experience and your perspective. So let's dive into it. So looking back at your journey, was there a defining moment when you realized that simply connecting traditional training wasn't really helping the business? Was there a defining moment?
Okay. It's a wonderful question, Ram, to start the podcast with, right? So, if I'm honest, there wasn't one dramatic moment. Okay. There was a slow, uncomfortable realization that built up over several programs and years.
All right.
But if I had to point out to the clearest turning point, right, it was during a large scale onboarding redesign, which I led across multiple business lines.
Mhm.
Now, we had built a genuinely very good program on paper, structured content, a clean LMS journey, strong completion tracking, and the numbers looked great. Completion rates were in the 90s, positive feedback score. Every dashboard metric an L&D leader is taught to chase was green. However, when I sat down with the business leaders and asked them a very
Mhm.
simple question, has this actually changed how analysts perform in their first 90 days on the job? Now, the honest answer was we didn't really know,
Yeah.
right? We had measured whether people finished the training. We had never rigorously measured whether the business or got better because of it. Now that gap really hit me hard, Ram,
All right.
because it meant I could show a perfect looking report to the leadership
Yeah.
and still not know if I had moved the needle on anything that mattered to the business.
True. True.
So that's the moment where training stopped being the goal for me and became a tool, and one tool among several others for solving a business problem. So I reframed how I approached everything afterwards. So
Yeah.
instead of starting with what content do we need to build, I started asking what is the business trying to achieve? And is training even the right lever to pull, right? Sometimes it was often the real fix was a process change, a manager capability gap, or a system redesign. Ram. And training was only a small piece of a larger solution there. So it also changed how I actually designed measurement from day one of a program, not as an afterthought. Instead of bolting on a survey at the end, I started actually building in leading indicators tied to actual job performance. Okay. Time to productivity, error rates, manager reported readiness, so that by the time a program launched,
Mhm.
right, we already knew what success meant in business terms and not just a completion rate. So looking back, I think, Ram, every L&D professional has this movement eventually. So the difference is what you do with it. So you can keep optimizing your completion dashboards,
Yeah, yeah.
or you can accept the harder, more accountable path, designing for business outcomes and being willing to be measured against them, right? So once you've seen that gap
Mm-hmm.
between a green check mark and a real result, it's very hard for me to actually completely unsee it, right? And honestly, it's made me a better partner to the business, because now the conversation is not did people come attend training,
Yeah, yeah.
it's did we solve the problem you came to me with. So a green check mark is not proof of learning,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's just a proof of clicking, is what I would say.
Absolutely, spot on. Many L&D professionals experience this situation when a business leader says, "Can you just run a quick training session for us?" In that situation, how do you take things forward? How do you navigate the conversation and help the stakeholders to understand the bigger picture without creating the resistance?
Again, another very good question, Ram. See, this happens constantly, okay? And early in my career, I used to say yes immediately because saying yes felt like being helpful, right? Everybody feels that.
That's yeah.
Over time, I realized that saying yes too quickly,
Mhm.
right, is actually the least helpful thing you can actually do, because you end up building something fast that doesn't solve the actual problem,
Yeah.
right? And then you both walk away disappointed 6 weeks later,
Yeah.
except now there's also a wasted budget line
True.
and a leader who thinks training doesn't work, right?
Mhm.
So the shift I made was this: I stopped treating it as a request to push back on
Mhm.
and started treating it as a request to clarify, right?
Mhm.
Now, when someone says just run a quick training, what they are really saying is, I have a problem
Yeah.
and I need to fix it fast. So the word training is just the first solution, right, that came to their mind. And it's rarely the actual requirement, right? So instead of saying no, I say yes to solving their problem. Okay. And
Mhm.
then ask one very specific question, Ram. Absolutely, I would like to help you, but help me understand
Yeah.
what success looks like in the next 90 days from the business point of view and not the classroom point of view. Okay. So that single question does a lot of work for me. Most leaders haven't actually thought past the training itself,
Mhm.
right? They haven't defined what better looks like in numbers. So the moment you ask it, right, you're not the person blocking their urgent request, but you are actually the partner taking their request seriously enough to make sure it actually works, right? So
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, Ram, that conversation reveals the real issue is not a skill gap at all.
Yeah.
It's actually a process bottleneck,
Mhm.
an unclear expectation from a manager, right? Or a tool that doesn't work the way people need it to. So training might still be part of the answer, but now it's the right sized part.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I have also learned to bring data into the conversation early, even informally, right? A quick reference to a similar situation where a quick training fix did not move the needle at all, and what it did instead, right? So the other thing I've actually learned is timing, Ram.
Okay.
If a leader is in crisis mode,
Mhm.
genuinely under pressure, right? That's not the moment for a long strategic conversation. Okay. In fact, in that moment, you help them stabilize first, and you have the what does success actually look like conversation once the
Mhm.
immediate fire is out, right? So reframing at the wrong moment feels like resistance to them. So reframing at the right moment feels like a partnership for them, right?
Of course.
So the real skill is not pushing back at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's the learning to ask the one question that turns an order into a conversation
Mhm.
and picking the right moment to ask it, right? It's as simple as that. So don't say no to the training, but say yes to defining what success actually means for them. That really matters, Ram.
It does. It does actually, and I love the concept. Request to clarify. Again, saying yes to the problem solving and understanding how urgent it is, and then deciding how much time we do have in terms of planning, strategizing, and then moving. But again, it's a partnership where we understand each other, and that start with having the clarity on both sides actually. Today, almost everyone is talking about AI for creating presentations and learning content. But from your perspective, how are you using AI to transform day to day work, decision making, and capability building?
Great. So I would actually, give you two examples from.
Okay.
Okay. So content generation is the use case everyone talks about,
Right?
right? Through AI.
Mhm.
But honestly, it's the least interesting thing AI actually does for L&D.
Okay.
Okay. Making a slide deck or a script faster is a nice efficiency gain,
It is.
but it does not actually change the fundamental shape of the work, right?
Mhm.
So, where AI has genuinely changed how I operate is in the operational glue work that used to consume most of an L&D team's time without anyone noticing. So, the first example is I was leading the redesign of a large analyst onboarding program, Ram, spanning several business lines, each with its own stakeholders, timelines, and requirements. Okay. Historically, that kind of a program actually lives or dies on manual coordination.
Okay.
Someone chasing down which analyst is at which stage, which manager hasn't signed off yet,
Mhm.
which compliance module is overdue, right? So that coordination work is invisible, unglamorous, and it eats an enormous amount of time. Okay.
Mhm.
So what we built instead was a more autonomous AI supported system that could actually track analyst progress, flag where someone was failing behind or falling behind, and adapt actually the pathway itself depending on whether the analyst was a junior or more experienced. Different pacing, different path without a human manually reassigning content every time. Okay, that was the first use case where it is helping me out. The second use case is using AI for diagnosis before design. So rather than assuming what capability gaps exist across an organization, I built an AI fluency survey,
Mhm.
okay,
Yeah.
specifically to assess where people actually stood, not self reported comfort level, but a structured org wide read on capability gaps. Okay. Now, that data could actually see precisely which groups needed fundamental or a foundational exposure
Yeah.
and which needed advanced application training, which meant we did not waste months building the wrong thing for the wrong audience. Okay.
True.
So I also use AI heavily as a thinking partner in framework design round.
All right.
Stress testing a leveling metrics, a succession model, or a skills taxonomy by asking it to poke holes in the logic before you know I take it to the stakeholders. So that's not content generation either.
Yeah.
That's using it as a second set of eyes on structural decisions,
Mhm.
right? That used to take much longer to pressure test with a room full of people. So
True.
if I had to summarize the pattern, right,
Mhm.
the biggest unlock isn't AI helping you write things faster.
Okay.
It's actually the AI removing the manual coordination and diagnostic work that used to quietly consume 60 to 70% of L&D team's bandwidth.
True.
Now, the tracking, the chasing, the guessing about where the gaps really are, so that is actually freeing up the time. And suddenly the team has room to actually do the strategic work everyone always says they don't have time for. So AI's real job in L&D, Ram, is not writing content
Mhm.
faster.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's actually replacing the manual glue work nobody wanted to do it anyway.
Interesting. Interesting perspective. Of course, I mean, it's a learning for me as well because that happens that we eventually get into content and try to save some time in there. But true. When you're speaking with senior leaders or the board, what metric or proof point did help you to secure their confidence and investment in learning and development?
Very strategic question, Ram. if there's one thing I've actually learned sitting across from senior stakeholders
Hmm.
is this, Ram. Boards don't fund training, okay? They fund a number moving in the right direction.
True, true.
So the single most effective point I have ever used is not a satisfaction score on a or a completion rate.
Okay.
Okay. It's a clean before and after on a metric the business already cares about, tied directly and unambiguously to the program. So, for example, on the onboarding redesign, right, the number that got attention wasn't we delivered X hours of content,
Hmm.
it was actually time to productivity. How long did it take a new analyst on average to reach a defined performance? Okay, before the redesign versus after. So that's a number a CFO understands instantly because it translates directly into a cost, into revenue capacity, into risk reduction, right? A faster ramped analyst is also typically a more accurate one, which matters enormous in a regulated environment, Ram. So the reason this works better than almost anything else is that it removes the burden of a proof from L&D and puts it where it actually belongs, in the language the business already uses to make decisions, right? So nobody on a board debates whether reducing ramp up time by a meaningful margin across a large analyst population is valuable. So the math does itself. Compare that to a satisfaction score of 4.6 out of 5, which is nice, but which a skeptical finance leader can actually dismiss in one sentence saying, people liked it, but did it change anything? Right? I've also learned that credibility of that one number depends heavily on having
Hmm.
a clean baseline RAM before you start. So this is something a lot of L&D functions get wrong. They design and launch the program first
Okay.
and only think about measurement afterwards,
Hmm.
which they have no real before picture to compare it to.
True, true.
So now I insist on capturing the baseline metric, okay, before a single session is even delivered, specifically so that the after number has the teeth, right? So the other proof point, Ram, that tends to land well alongside a headline number is
Mhm.
a retention or attrition figure
Okay.
in a critical, expensive to replace role. Because the boards understand the cost of replacing a talent figure is critical, expensive to replace, right? For far better than they understand the cost of skill gaps. Okay. So when you can say this program is connected to a measurable improvement in retention in a role that
Mhm.
costs six figures to backfill, right? That redefines L&D from a cost center into a risk mitigation function, right? Which is a very different conversation to be in, Ram,
It is. It is.
right? So if I had to boil it down, pick one number the business already tracks and cares about,
Mhm.
get a real baseline before you start,
Yeah.
and make the connection between your program and that number as direct and undeniable as possible. Everything else, satisfaction, completion, engagement, is supporting evidence, not the baseline. So boards don't fund training, they actually fund a number that moves the needle.
Just a quick question connection to the previous one. Is it different for technical programs and the non-technical actually? So having the baseline crystal clear number actually. So can it be different from both the sections, with technical and non-technical, or can we have a similar process for both one?
I wouldn't say it's different. I would say it both has the same thing because technical you can see something moving,
All
right?
right.
Because you learn a skill, you go back, apply, solve the problem, right? And the solution is there, right? Whereas for behavioral or non-technical programs, right, it takes time to to witness the behavioral change. So that's why we say that anywhere between 60 to 90 days is required
Right.
for them to go back and apply and then find the difference. Now here, Ram, manager plays a very, very critical role.
Hmm.
Okay. I would say why? Because honestly, tell me, you've spoken to so many L&D leaders, so many business leaders, right? How many of these leaders have come back and said that, okay, after the program, my manager or the lead who's managing those people,
Hmm.
right, has played a critical coaching role for them. So, how many times have you heard that a manager asks these set of questions to a learner after they come back from a training? What have you learned today from the training?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, how are you going to go back and apply this to your work, right? And what support you
really.
need from me for you to execute this learning and bring in that difference. Okay, so here manager is actually becomes a coach as well,
Absolutely.
right? So it's very critical for a manager to ask these questions to every individual learner whom he sends or she sends to a training program. It's very critical.
Absolutely. And of course, I mean, if the managers are not the kind of core stakeholder in learning and development, it may not work as it's supposed to be.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, if we fast forward to next 5 years, how do you think the LND would look like? Would you still call it LND, or would it have a more broader picture in the near future? What do you think?
This is purely my perspective, Ram.
Sure,
Okay.
sure. Great.
I don't think L&D survives a standalone label, honestly.
Okay.
Okay.
Mhm.
Not because the function disappears, but because the name has become too narrow today for what the work actually needs to be. Okay.
Mhm.
So my guess is it gets absorbed into something like a talent and capability or human capital performance
Okay.
language that sits much closer to business strategy conversations than to training delivery conversations.
Right.
Now, the name matters because it signals where the function sits in the org's mental model,
Structure. Yeah. Mhm.
right? And right now, L&D still gets mentally filed next to the compliance and content, which limits the seat it gets at the table. So the bigger shift, though, is in the job itself. So today, a huge amount of L&D's time still goes into building and delivering content. 5 years from now, Ram, I think that shrinks dramatically because AI will be able to generate and personalize content at a speed and scale no team of instructional designers can match. Right? I'm sure you agree with that.
Yeah.
Now, what doesn't shrink,
Mhm.
what actually grows is the architectural work, right? Now, what I mean by this is designing skill based organizational structures, mapping the capabilities the business will need 18 months from now,
Mhm.
okay? Not just the ones it needs today, building that system like the ones I have worked on that can adapt a development pathway to an individual in real time rather than pushing everyone through the same generic course. So I think it almost like the shift that happened in manufacturing
Mhm.
decades ago, moving from people physically building every part by hand to people designing and overseeing systems that build at scale, right? So L&D's future job, Ram, is closer to that, not the hands-on deliver of content, but the architect of a capability system,
Mhm.
one that uses AI to personalize,
Yeah.
that ties directly into, actually, I would say, workforce planning and succession. And that is judged not on how much learning happened, but on how quickly and precisely the organization's capability matches what the business actually needs. So the functions that make this transition well will end up sitting inside strategy and workforce planning
Mhm.
conversations, not off to the side as a delivery arm. So the function that does make this transition, the ones that stay focused on content completion, will likely get absorbed, outsourced, or automated
Yeah.
because, Ram, that part of the work genuinely can be done cheaper and faster by AI already,
True.
right?
Mhm.
So, my honest prediction, the name changes to something broader, The day to day work shifts from building and delivering to architecting and diagnosing, and the yardsticks of success moves from how much did we train to how fast can this organization's capability adapt to where the organization or the business is going. So that's not a small evolution, Ram,
Yeah.
right? It's a completely different job description wearing a familiar name for a little while longer before that actually changes too. So L&D survives the next 5 years only if it stops counting activity and starts owning outcomes.
And sometimes it might be a difficult task actually. So I mean, activities to the owning outcome. I mean, it may not be as simple as it seems on the paper or in the strategies, but that's where the efforts from the L&D professionals comes in picture. Right.
Correct.
Truly, truly valuable insights. Thank you so much for pouring your 25 years of experience. Thank you so much. But before we wrap up, a quick question: is there a single piece of advice you want to leave the L&D professionals and senior managers with?
I would actually have a closing thought for sure, Ram.
Yeah.
Training was always meant to be a means to an end, right?
Mm-hmm.
Somewhere along the way, I think we started treating it like the end itself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the next chapter of this function belongs to whoever is brave enough to stop measuring what's easy to count
Yeah.
and start measuring what actually counts, is what I would actually want the L&D professionals, leaders, senior managers to actually start thinking. What is the value that you're bringing in as a function, right? Rather than as I mentioned right at the beginning of our conversation, that it's not only a green tick mark, right?
True, true.
What value and what business outcome are we driving, right? How is this function connecting to the business revenue at the end of the day? As I said, it's L&D is not a cost center. It has to be a business partnering, right?
Yeah.
So are we doing enough to bring in that business revenue, right? Increase the, match up to the gross margins of the business. I think that's something that the L&D leaders have to start thinking about.
Sure. And so, how do we? I mean, just last question on that. How do the L&D professionals empower themselves to be capable of doing what you just mentioned? Actually.
Uh, See, it's very important that, as I said, L&D function or L&D leaders cannot sit in silos. Okay. It's
Okay.
very important for them to start interacting with the business on a continuous basis, month on month base,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? To start with. And then, you know, earn a seat on the table where you have all the business leaders together,
Mm-hmm.
including your sales, pre sales team, right? And then understand the conversation that where the business is heading up to, what are the challenges the businesses are facing, okay? And when you have this one-on-one conversation with the business on a regular basis, right, you tend to understand that what challenges or what gaps are they facing where they're not able to project themselves to bring in new leads or new or more revenue to them, right? So what I personally do, Ram, is that I make sure that I connect with each and every business leader of mine on a month-on-month basis to understand, right, what are the certification gaps that we're looking at, what are the certifications that we want to, want people to be upskilled to, so that we are able to showcase better capability to our clientels, right? And what kind of technology shift are you seeing, right, for you to bring in that revenue from the clientele side? What is their thinking process?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So when you start sitting on that table, right, and listen to these conversations, trust me,
Mm-hmm.
right, you don't become only a silo leader. Rather, you start thinking yourselves that how do I start partnering with all these functions, okay, to add that value and bring in that revenue and the new leads and the accounts to the organization.
Agree. Agree. Of course. I mean, so being. I mean, of
So
course.
rather than, yeah, sorry, want to
Great.
add one more thing. So rather than me waiting for the business to reach out to me, I proactively reach out to business.
Yeah.
Right? That's the shift rather than being reactive, I started being proactive.
Okay.
And then, because they also then feel that, okay, I'm not the only one who's thinking about it. So there's somebody else also who's ready to support me, or cooperate with me to, build this journey.
True, true, true. Otherwise, no, many of us, we keep waiting for the managers to come to us and then ask for the
Right.
programs. So being proactive can definitely help. And again, being part of that meeting, earning the spot on the table actually, and
Correct.
creating an ecosystem of understanding the need and then offering the help can be really, really handy. Definitely.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because it's also important for the L&D leader to reach out to the bottom layer as well, Ram.
Hmm.
Right? Okay, it's good that, okay, you interact with the, with that top brass, the business leaders, but the people who are actually managing the workforce, right? The leads, the reporting managers, right? They are the ones who actually know what problems are they facing, right? Why is the team not able to function or give that right output? So it's very important for the L&D leader to reach out to that level also to understand, right? That what are the problems. Then it's very easy for you to then correlate to the business leaders conversation as well.
Definitely, definitely. Great, great. I mean, perspective. I mean, there are lots of things, of course, on top of my mind, but in the interest of time, we'll pause here. But thank you so much for joining us, and I appreciate your insights and perspectives.
Pleasure is all mine, Ram. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.